Welcome to MOTS, where we'll be applying the Manzer or mostly Thurlow scale of quantitative analysis of pop culture narrative through a binary system.
Or MOTS! This podcast contains spoilers, mature content, and language. Viewer discretion advised. Hello, and welcome to part 3 of our True Detective Season 2 retrospect. I'm Jonathan Ian Manzer with Scott Thurlow.
Welcome back for the third time.
And Stephen Hermosi.
Hello again.
So, in our first episode, we went over the characters in True Detective. Second episode, we went over the characters in LA Confidential. And now we're going to bring them both together. And I'm going to give a summary, or attempt to at least, a summary of both plots at once to highlight how similar these movies are. So, the initial mystery centers around the death of a crooked, one is a cop and one's a city official, but they're both people who are involved in a conspiracy at a kind of medium level of power in this greater conspiracy that's going on. So this death leads 3 police officers to investigate the murder, which halfway through the series in the movie results in a shootout with some shady minority characters that get set up by the conspiracy to take the fall. And in this shootout, a corrupt cop who's a member of the conspiracy gets murdered. So, after the shootout, everything's resolved until the 3 police officers realize that the people they took down weren't actually the ones behind the original murder. So it leads them further into their investigations. And the conspiracies involve a blackmail ring of for sex parties and pornography, where politicians and other individuals in who are in power in
the movers
California
and the shakers
are blackmailed for favors. This investigation leads one of the members of the police to be murdered, which leads the other 2 on the right trail. One of the members of the conspiracy has his wrists forcefully cut, and both of these people performed surgery on prostitutes to make them more beautiful. And I believe that's the end of the real, the finales of both are different. One's far more satisfactory than the other. One's far more depressing than the other. But that basically gives the full summation of both movies. Oh, and the true bad guy behind it is the captain of a police department in California. Again. So, I think someone should have been sued.
Well, maybe they will after hearing our analysis of it. But yeah, I mean, you're pretty much right. It's funny the way you said presented, but it's convoluted and Byzantine. But all those points hit one for one between both of these. I agree with that. It's just that, as you said at the end there, one of them pulled it off well, and the other one not so well. But regardless, they all exist as plot points. And
the big difference between the 2 is that True Detective adds Carlito's Way, as I mentioned in the first episode, as a secondary plot. So it's like the most derivative piece of trash I've seen in a very long time.
It does have a lot of similarities with both of those films. I mean,
that's putting it lightly.
You just traced out the whole entire timeline of the movies up until the end, basically. So I don't know what I can get into there, but I would like to say that if somebody gets sued because of our podcast and it's not us, I'll be ecstatic.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Nick, I still haven't learned how to pronounce it.
Palazzo.
Yeah.
Nicky P.
Nicky P, yes. Nicky P was accused of plagiarism in the first season of True Detective. Yes. And I'm going to further... I'm not going to accuse him of anything. but I'm going to, as he does, pay an homage to his own plagiarism.
Well, I was going to say, as we pointed out in the second episode of this series, is it homage as a ripoff? And I'm gonna kind of glance back. I'm not saying he's ripping off LA Confidential, but I'm just saying, look at the facts, if you will.
If you can see, Scott has a big chalkboard where he's outlined.
Yes. We'll put the image of my chalkboard conspiracy theory about conspiracy theories, specifically pertaining to these two stories later on. But yeah, I all that facetious aside, I believe that it's quite heavily, at the very least, I'll phrase it this way, it is very heavily influenced by LA Confidential, and for all the reasons I'm about to lay out.
But not only the plot, there are point-for-point characters
as well.
that... So, Scott, would you like to begin with a side-by-side comparison?
Yes. All right, so here's what it is. I think it's quite obvious. I think we all agreed upon this. In LA Confidential, character of Bud White equals Ray Velcoro in True Detective. And then Ed Exley equals Deserides. And Jack Vincennes equals Woodrow. I guess, like, that maybe not isn't the... It's close enough to 1-to-1 ratio, I think.
No, it is, but it's their purpose in the story is a 1-to-1 ratio.
Yes, you're right.
But
overall, is their character the same? You're right. But the
Jack Vincennes has an arc. The guy whose name I can't remember,
Woodrow is a character.
Paul Woodrow. Or
yes,
yeah.
But you're right. But the purpose they serve is pretty much the same in both plots. Correct. And also, Captain Smith and Holloway and Captain Holloway are the corrupt, Captain Corrupt. Really, they should just slap that name on them, and that's the role they serve as well.
And Frank is Carlito. So
yes.
But so why is Ray and can't think of Bud White 1-to-1 ratios?
Well, they both kind of serve the same purpose in their respective films. They're kind of like the muscle guy who, I think that Bud White has more of a code really than Ray Velcoro does, but they both have their own kind of code that they live by, which basically means you can do whatever you want as long as you think that you're doing right by, society or somebody else.
Justify the means.
Yeah, pretty much. They both have those things that they hold on a little bit too tight to. With Velcoro, it's his son, I guess, and with Bud White, it's
Women folk.
Yeah, specifically Lynn, right?
Yes.
So that's kind of the ratio there. I'm sure you guys have a couple other things.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's point out some other things. I have this right. The Black Mountain guys in True Detective equal the rest of the faceless corrupt cops that joined Smith in the shootout.
Well, I want to talk still about Ray and Bud.
Okay, fair enough.
There's a couple more points. Not only are there like basic character things, but their character arcs very similar too. They're both happy to be thugs who slowly realize that their lifestyles don't bring them happiness.
Right.
And they both get gunned down at the end while trying to do the right thing. However,
that's absolutely true.
Yeah, Bud survives and is in a realistic gunfight, while Ray goes down in a platoon, like maybe gunned down by paramilitary.
So now they're opening up Platoon as well.
So
I guess as we discuss, we'll figure out how many more things are homaging, if you will.
Well, there's that famous thing. The mayor who died in the pool is a direct shot from Sunset Boulevard.
That's true.
So
fair enough. All right. Well, I had one more, but I'll hold off on it. But I'll speak to their analogies of arcs. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's like I said, as I described Bud White's character previously, he's sort of like the thuggish, like shoot first, ask questions later. Or at least in his case, mostly punch first and ask questions later. And that's basically how Velcoro's character was set up as well. And yes, as you said, they follow pretty much they follow mostly the same track, probably 90% the same track, if not maybe more than that. And therefore, they're clear analogies to us and between the two series.
I would also say that I thought that while they had very similar scenes where they both show up at a house and they're like, basically trying to teach somebody
beat up
a lesson,
dude.
Bud White's was way less over the top and like, I don't know.
It was better than True Detective.
He didn't beat the shit out of some guy in front of his son, which kind of seemed really out of place in general and out of place for any character that's like that is supposed to live by some sort of code.
Well, I kind of missed that we didn't have Bud White doing a shit ton of coke and getting drunk
and rocking out.
Instead, we got him creepily sitting in a car outside the Lynn's house. But no one's perfect. I think that there's a less of a parallel between Annie and Exley, though.
I somewhat agree, but I think they're the closest parallels. even so, within this, go ahead.
But yeah, again, they sort of serve the same purpose, but I feel it's a stretch to draw like distinct parallels.
I'll tell you, I think the biggest one, they want to be good cops. They want to play by the book. They don't they're adverse to bending the rules. They want to see justice served in the true sense, at least according to them. And so that's why I think they're the most one. They're also like perhaps more intuitive, quote unquote smarter than the at least again at first that's how they're set up than Bud White's character. So they sort of piece the evidence together and they're going over the case files and they're like thinking about putting all the puzzle pieces together to figure out the chain of corruption.
But Exley gets advanced in his career and uses the system to move up the ladder.
Yes,
and she gets pregnant.
Yes, well, that's at the end.
She also gets
screwed over by the system.
She also gets knocked down a couple of times, like throughout, which I guess is the parallel where, an inverse parallel, if that's even a thing.
But this is what moving on to the other character, the Jack Vincennes and
Paul Woodrow.
His character's as bland as his name.
Lanny McManderson.
They served exactly the same role in this story. Both of them, we mentioned in the last podcast that Jack Vincennes was kind of a secondary character to Exley and Bud White's plot. Like, Bud White and Exley were foils of each other. Jack Vincennes was in a different category altogether. And the next thing is Annie and Ray were kind of foils to a certain extent, while Paul kind of did his own thing. Yeah. But Jack and Paul both end up getting killed while investigating.
By the big bad, yes.
But the thing is, there's they both get killed by the police chief.
Yep.
Also, hold on, before you go, I just want to say, while Ray and Annie had or while Bud and Edmund, both had sex with the same woman, in True Detective, they just cut out the middleman and had the two of them fuck.
Exactly.
It made sense in LA Confidential, but certainly did not make sense in...
I was going to make a joke.
Although, it wouldn't have made sense without the one character who was not in True Detective, but maybe should have been, the reporter.
Yes, we'll get to that earlier.
But
I was going to make a joke that as much as LA Confidential did everything better than True Detective, the one thing they should have had is Bud White and Exley having sex with each other.
I'm not looking forward to that.
Go on.
Rippling Russell Crowe.
With that nice
and Lynn could be stalking them through the window. Anyway.
But the thing is, while Jack Vincennes is such a better character, and it's not only because Kevin Spacey, the fact is he had an arc.
Yes.
And we went over both of these in previous things, but I want to reiterate this. Jack Vincennes is a kind of lazy cop in it for the fame and the tabloids.
Prestige, yeah.
And he decides to become a real cop, and that leads him to his tragic death. But his death adds the definite
It means
clue.
something to the plot and also to himself as a character.
Yes.
Agreed. Whereas Woodrow does not.
Paul Woodrow never resolves his plot. He has this entire subplot of him being ashamed of being gay. That leads nowhere. His death is basically meaningless, except for adding kind of immediacy to the to Ray and what's the Deserides situation.
Sure.
But
agreed.
If he was cut out of the plot, if Jack Vincennes was cut out of the plot,
it would have fallen apart.
Yeah. But if this character's cut out of the plot, it wouldn't have mattered.
I agree with that, and as we covered that extensively in the last one, or in the True Detective episode. Yeah, here's what it was, and this is the one we're titled together. LA Confidential had set you up with all these characters, but perfectly it was immediately clear who each one was and what they were like, and then that was used as a base, and that could influence the way their arcs were and how they changed and grew as characters themselves. In Jack's case, to Woodrow's case, he didn't change and grow. You were introduced details to him that were in the end completely moot, and he had no arc whatsoever. So that's just I submit evidence A for the fact that LA Confidential pulled it off better in less time, I might add, which I think we'll talk about.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. He just didn't. Woodrow just did not change at all. There was no development.
He learned nothing, gained nothing.
They
in the end
introduced all these
nothing.
things that should have probably caused some sort of change in him, but he just kind of remained the same, self-loathing wet blanket the entire time.
Yeah.
So I'd like to. We talked about characters, protagonists, quite a bit in the previous two. Now I want to focus on other aspects of it, and I would like to start with the antagonists here. Scott, would you like to provide background for both the antagonist of True Detective and the antagonist for LA Confidential?
Well, like I said, they are chief corruption, essentially, if you will. They were involved. So Captain Smith was basically taking over the former mob boss's racket, and in order to do that, he had to tie up all his loose ends and make sure he used Bud to intimidate all the other would-be criminals, so that he would be still, number one. What was it? Mickey something was his name? Mickey Cohen. Yeah, so he's taking over his. In True Detective's case, the chief years ago, his partner, the lieutenant. They worked on they covered up they staged a looting, I believe, right, to steal the diamonds.
During the LA riots.
Yeah, during the LA riots, right. So, and in order to cover that all up, and that's been going on for years. So, everyone under them either needs to be brought into the corruption fold or eliminated in order for them to perpetuate their own corruption.
See, I have this real problem. In LA Confidential, they do a fantastic job of keeping everything concise. You don't, I don't remember, I've seen this movie many, many times now. It's actually one of my favorite films. But I don't remember whether I suspected Captain Smith all along. Now when I watch
definitely wouldn't, upon first seeing, I would think.
I didn't when I first saw it.
I mean, about halfway through,
it starts
to become clearer.
They hint at it a little bit, but they red herring you pretty well. Mm-hmm. Agreed.
But he has a presence throughout. You see him not only through his actions, but you're seeing him through different characters' points of view and how he interacts with all three of all three of the protagonists. And it very much feels like a kind of betrayal at the end. Again, I can't really speak to how effective it is now because I'm well aware.
Sure. But regardless, it's handled well.
Yeah, it is. It's very handled well. And now I notice a lot of the small things of when they have the two characters have the shot planting the shotguns, the kind of glances they give each other, panic of I didn't notice that the first time around, but now I pick up on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt connected to Captain Smith. The guy who ends up being the villain appears in the first 2 episodes.
Briefly at that, 10
and
minutes or so.
I barely remember.
Then he's gone, yeah.
And it felt like...
He pops up again later and oh yeah, that guy is a character in this. I guess I remember that. Yeah, exactly.
They set up so many red herrings that I oh, is this guy? Okay.
It's a flock of red herrings blinding you.
Oh, so the Russian wasn't really the bad guy, but he's not really.
He's kind of a dick.
Yeah. So, there were a lot of potential villains, but it felt very organic the way LA Confidential did it.
Right.
Agreed.
Where it felt, I don't even know how to say it.
It was haphazard, I guess is the best way. I think I described it earlier, but yeah, it totally was. Agreed. They ran into a lot of missteps where you could see what they wanted to do, and as we said, they just didn't do it because either here's what I'm going to say, and maybe I'll say it now. LA Confidential did the same plot in 2 and change hours. Perfectly concise, condensed. You knew exactly what was happening. Everything was not spelled out. It fell into place, bit by bit, as each character discovered what they discovered. Whereas True Detective sort of meandered a bit. They wanted to introduce this detail about this character, but didn't matter in the end, etc. So, like I said, yeah, they're basically. Not basically. They are indeed doing roughly the same plot, 90% the same plot. However, the way that in which the characters arrive from plot point to plot point is half of it is completely pointless anyways, which makes you lose interest in it at large, in both the plot itself and the characters.
Yeah, it was definitely not a concise storyline.
Upon watching LA Confidential again earlier tonight, I was surprised how often, and it never felt like an expository dump, but characters would have conversations about what's happening in the story.
Yeah.
There's a great scene when they're actually when Bud and Exley finally start to get together, and they're both explaining what information
they found.
They have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it feels very kind of organic.
Well, it feels like that because they have a reason to tell each other this stuff. It's not like they're just explaining something that the other one should know.
Right. They have a piece of puzzle and they put it together.
They need to tell each other that in order for that information to go from one to the other.
It works perfectly because they're telling them, but also it's filling in the gaps that the audience hasn't picked up. and I never felt that True Detective did that. You know, like
the reason you didn't feel that way is because they didn't.
While watching LA Confidential, I was following along with the investigation, watching them. Like it felt like, I hate to keep using this word, but it felt very organic investigation. Sometimes the leads didn't pan out. And you saw the strengths of different characters as they handled different sections of the investigation. How and like you're starting to build together. It's this like it's Buzz Meeks underneath the House of Dead. So they do a very good job of like pacing it well and keeping you informed. Where True Detective, as you mentioned earlier, meandered through a lot of unnecessary character development, and the entire investigation happened very quickly and felt very inorganic.
As you said, you're right. So the plot points in the Act 1, 2, and 3 in LA Confidential are meted out perfectly. It's paced perfectly. Whereas True Detective either took too long, thus meandering, or rushed and sprinted to a plot point. So therefore, because they and alternately even sometimes they did both in the same episode, so it felt completely disjointed because of that. Like, you know, there was no you couldn't settle in because either you're being rushed forward and you're like, what the fuck is happening, or you're like, oh, it's taking forever and nothing is goddamn happening.
Yeah, but I think another big problem with True Detective was that they didn't. It seemed like they didn't care that much about the details of not only the case but like the characters. You know, we mentioned this about LA Confidential, but you know, the way that the little mannerisms that they all had, like the little ways that the ways of speaking that they each had. They each had their own distinct voice, and they each had these kind of things that set them apart from the other characters.
Little facets to them that rounded out their characters and made them more believable and made you like them both as characters and as relevant to the plot. Where True Detective tried to do that, but again, because it just was mishandled.
I just feel like they didn't spend enough.
Right.
You know, they didn't spend enough time.
Rushed,
not screen time, but I feel like they didn't spend enough time like working that stuff out.
There's a perfect example of a scene in LA Confidential that adds to character development and kind of moves the plot along. There's a part where one of the major subplots of this is that this rich millionaire kind of Hugh Hefner type character, it runs a prostitution ring where he has prostitutes that look like actresses. So Jack Vincennes and Exley go to confront this mobster in a bar, and there is a woman who looks like Lana Turner. So Exley confronts her, and calls her a whore.
Insults her, yes.
Cut to look like Lana Turner, and is holding the mobster. Turns out to be Lana Turner. Now, again, that's a dead end part, but you saw both a growth in Exley's character and in Jack Vincennes' character, and seeing their interactions.
It was a friendship building moment.
Exactly.
At the end of it,
that's exactly what
that's what made you care about them as characters. Yes. There was anything like that. Like, there were many pointless scenes in True Detective, but none of which rounded out the characters, so there was no point to them. You know, you didn't even get that out of it. Like,
little things like that are why it was so brutal when Jack is killed. You know, like, not only did you care about him as a character, but you cared about the built-up partnership that he had with with Exley.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of that, there's another good moment too early on. I mentioned this: the Christmas fight, the Christmas brawl in the jail. Right, Jack goes down. He's sort of like smarmily.
Bloody Christmas.
He's sort of smarmily like just watching it unfold. He's not. He wasn't. It's clear to me as he acted it out. It was clearly he was not going. He didn't intend to like get involved or do anything. He was sort of hanging out, like being amused by it. Then someone gets punched into him. Gets blood on his shirt, and then he gets pissed. Like, you know,
his white shirt,
his like super nice, his fancy Hollywood Jack suit, and that's also a perfect character moment. But it's also like it's a little scene within a scene that's relevant. It propels the plot. Whereas again, True Detective did not have things like that, or when they tried to do it, fell completely flat.
But the level of detail that LA Confidential put into its characters, like Exley looking for his glasses every time he's about to get into a gunfight and not having them on him.
Exactly right. That's a really good one.
Or Jack kind of like smugging in front of a mirror and hobnobbing with celebrities.
How many times did he say the motto,
whatever you desire?
Yeah. How many times did he say whatever you desire? I was noticing that
3 or 4 times.
It was like I think it was maybe more than that. It was at least 4, I would say.
I think 4, maybe 5.
And Russell Crowe actually, believably. He has a look of where he's painfully trying to process his thoughts. It's a brilliant piece of acting. Like he has this like expression on his face that is so perfect for the
I
character.
agree with that. Yeah.
It makes it so believable. And this thing is like none of the other where we have subtlety in this, we have Colin Farrell getting on a coke binge.
Yeah.
When he gets a little bit of bad
with
news.
a montage to a rock song, or, like again, yeah, completely out of place. Like as we said, we understood what they were going for, but because it was just something about it was off, it wasn't executed right. It made you care less about the character, when in fact, of course, their intent was to make you care more and round out that character.
So I want to go into another section, supporting cast. So does anyone want to talk about any of in particular?
Well, I just wanted to make one more analogy comparison, right? So in Our Confidential, what's her name? Who plays Lynn? Kim Basinger.
Yeah.
Right. So she's her own character. Like she's a character singular, whereas in True Detective, it's just a bunch of like, I don't mean to be insulting, but nameless Russian hookers. Like she essentially is them, and like I guess the other chick that they find, the corpse that turns up, the one that they got murdered at the Night Owl. Mm-hmm. That you know what I mean? Like so, therefore, like it's hard to care about a bunch of like hookers. I'm sorry, like in True Detective, they're just in a party in a room. They at least give you an XP for them in LA Tech Confidential. I'm sorry, through her, so you can have more, can sympathize more and get her perspective and her interactions with the police forces and her involvement in the conspiracy itself.
To that point, though, and kind of branching off of that into the second areas, in LA Confidential, you have the dead prostitute's mother, who's this kind of senile old woman but you feel very like. I felt very bad for
clearly
her.
The death of her daughter's affected her, and she's also, not all there prostitute to begin with. Sure.
And you actually see a number of scenes with her, and all of them are like both sort of funny and sort of tragic.
Yeah, they're sort of sadly funny. I agree with that.
Where in a similar way, you have the sister of the prostitute in True Detective, and I don't remember anything about her.
Exactly. They didn't devote enough time, or didn't care. Like, you couldn't care because she wasn't there enough to attach to.
But to the point is that if you're not going to develop your character of like the victim itself
enough, then don't.
You need to give us an emotional reason of why, like through the family, we should care about these people.
For sure.
But I didn't get that in True Detective.
I absolutely agree with that.
Really, either of those. I completely agree. I was trying to think of. So the sister was the one that Desiree meets like early on in the show,
like the first or second episode,
and then she just every once in a while just is like, "Hey, you find my sister yet?" She's like, "Not yet."
Yeah,
like a couple times, and then she finds her, and that's pretty much it. I mean, there's not really much of a
haphazard as hell.
Yeah,
right? Like it's dropped in, and you're like, okay, like it's set up, and then you're supposed to care about, but because they don't mention it again, and if they do mention it, it's hardly relevant anyways. You're like, oh yeah, I remember that. Okay, so what?
Right. I mean, I guess maybe what True Detective was trying to do is make this more like real life, where not everything is connected or whatever.
Happy, I guess, but
but everything was connected.
Kind of, but it again didn't feel like it was
rushed. Connected is what I was wanting to say.
Well, as I mentioned in our first, I'm pretty sure it's a postmodern interpretation of film noir that is way over all of our heads.
Yeah,
and
it's way over its own head.
Is a genius.
Nicky P is a brilliant son of a bitch.
He's trolling us, but there's one more thing you want to get into this. I think I'll let Ian speak. But
before we go into Danny DeVito,
okay,
because I feel he's the most important character that's missing from True Detective, I'd like to go into Pratchett and Rick Springfield.
Okay,
because basically they're in a lot of senses the same character.
They also serve the same point, yes.
Yeah.
But do you think it was a satisfactory 1-to-1? I think Rick Springfield left an impression upon this show that it was sorely lacking in most other characters.
I would agree with that. I think that he did a really good job at that part. He kind of was a strange character that you saw a couple times, but he definitely had some gravity when he played that part. The way that the part was played, and whether it has to do with him or the script that he had, I'm going to lean more towards probably him.
Yes, I agree with that.
But I mean, I aside from the main characters in True Detective, there weren't that many characters that really left an impression on me.
I don't know if it's a perfect 1-to-1. There's certainly like if you're saying who equals who in each work, I agree with that. But I want to say I think that Pratchett was shown enough. Like he was more central to it. And again, because they condensed it, so like he was visited like 3 or 4 times, or whatever. And then the last time is his murder, or is they set him up, false suicide. Rick Springfield was in like 3 episodes at most. So same thing. Like he would have been if they showed him more often, if they made him more integral, like if he was more enfolded into the plot itself. But as it was, it felt like oh yeah, remember that guy? We'll go see him again. Like why though?
Actually, that's a very good point. I agree. I didn't know why they went to his house.
Yeah.
Pratchett's character was more of a bigger part.
He was
of
more
the
integral
plot.
to it. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, like than the other guy. The way that it was set up, just who he was, he couldn't have been like that high up in the.
Sure,
but
I see the similarities is all, but I'm just saying it was again handled and executed much better.
Yeah, but if this show was handled better, with Rick Springfield keeping the same role, I think we would be happy with his performance.
I agree with that.
It wasn't anything to elevate the entire show, but I think that he's definitely the best of the kind of antagonist there. But to the second, I think another character that actually left an impression on me was Desiree's father. Who played him?
I don't remember.
Actor.
I don't remember what his name is.
But nonetheless.
Yeah, he's been in a bunch of things before.
But he was a fantastic character. Unfortunately, they took
Underused.
another interesting character and put him on a bus.
Under and used.
Yeah, pretty much.
Actually, they put him on a
same thing. I think I mentioned
a beat up old truck, but
yeah, I think I mentioned that when we were talking about True Detective the other day. It was like, hey guys, why don't we fucking explore this a little bit more, this interesting thing a little bit more? Instead, you take the least interesting parts of all this and throw them into a blender at the end of the
dropped
at the end of the show
and forgotten about.
So, who wants to talk about the missing link?
I'll let you start off, and then I'll say about it.
All right. Throughout the entirety of L.A. Confidential, Danny DeVito, what's his character's name?
Sid Hitchens.
Sid Hitchens plays both the narrator and an integral role in the plot.
It's a narrator instigator, I guess I want to call him. Yeah.
But from the very beginning, he's the one who introduces you to this world, and throughout he keeps you updated on the things that are happening. And this is what is sorely missing from True Detective: someone to keep you updated with what's happening in this world.
Yeah,
to keep you he allows information that the protagonists don't know to be introduced to the audience.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. And like, here's the thing, right? He is sort of integral to a lot of it. He instigates a lot of it, right? So he's both he runs in all circles at all levels of the involvement of the conspiracy, more or less, right? So he knows the corrupt cops, he knows the chief, he also knows he works with Jack, and he has all his other contacts in the underworld. He knows that the who was he, the attorney general or whatever, the guy he set up for the motel room with the male actor, like to set him up to blackmail him. He knows everybody, and he's always there, and he's always like, hey, I got a little piece of information for you. Like, he just shows up every now and again, and he's sort of, if not, he doesn't, I don't want to say he drives the plot, but he pushes each character in a direction, further and further here and there, and yes, and also provides like a little bit of information. That's where Jack finds out at that one party, he finds out more about the fleur-de-lis thing. Because of Danny DeVito, like, offhandedly introducing him to the actor and just being there. So he sort of nudges each character, and that informs their other decisions and their other choices and what other information that they find out. So it all ties together very nicely. And yes, he sort of explains to you, like, he's sort of the audience surrogate almost, or he ties it all together. That guy really tied this movie together, man. Like, so that's all I can say.
I really like how much you find out that he like held back too throughout the movie. Like towards the end, you find out he's working with
he knows
Smith and Pratchett the entire time. Mm-hmm. But he gets questioned directly by Vincennes. Is like, do you know who this Pratchett guy is? Like, bro, Pratchett, I know him as much about him as you do.
He's just a slime.
When clearly, like he's and this is the type of thing that you can just extrapolate that out into the rest of his character. And he guarantee he just holds back stuff like this from everybody that he has dealings with.
Yeah, and
I think they all recognize that about him. Know that he's kind of this slimy guy, but he's also necessary, or provides a necessary service to everybody who's a little bit dirty to
but
keep them kind of in business.
Ultimately, that gets him killed in the end.
Yeah,
I'll disagree with Scott's analysis that it's an audience surrogate necessarily, but it does. Like True Detective had no audience surrogate, it had no person to give you a sense of what this world is. It kind of just almost followed too closely on the protagonists without giving you the breadth of scope needed to appreciate a conspiracy of this level.
And like a sprawling, metropolis that the city is, that this, L.A. and
the area, yeah, sure.
With surrounding suburbs are, you really don't get a sense for that. Whereas I think in season 1 of True Detective, you really did get a sense of like the place,
Sure. So I'm gonna say this, going back to Danny DeVito's character, right? So they decided to, True Detective that is, and those working on it, decided to cut out his character, and instead of that, we'll just shove in Carlito's way instead. And and that clearly didn't work. So I don't know. I just thought it's a little humorous thing, but I absolutely agree. If there was any character like that in TD season 2, then maybe it could have tied it again, could have sort of bridged it all together to make to make it all more evenly distributed, and cut it up so that you did care about the plot, and the plot moved at a better pace at least.
All right, so I'd like to talk a little bit about like kind of the pacing and the way these investigations unfolded throughout the movie and the series. In LA Confidential, you really get to see all the aspects of the investigation. And again, if they're going for realism in True Detective, it felt like kind of not quite realism, but like procedurally real there.
All right.
They have their interrogations. You see them like, we have a list of cars, so let's all split up and take some cars. And Jack Vincennes says, "Oh, I know a guy who can help us find this." So you're seeing all the characters work together to find out what this issue.
Trace down leads, yeah, sure.
And I don't feel True Detective. I don't remember them even investigating anything aside from kind of. I always felt like you discovered it. Like you see a scene where they're like, "Yeah, I was out doing this."
No, they did, but again, it was not paced well. So like one episode they were going through like the old record books, or like they had the photos of the diamonds and all that. But then it was totally not mentioned for like a next episode, or like even an episode and a half, or rough something like that. So again, you forgot about it, right? Whereas, as you just said, and as we're gonna say constantly, LA Confidential showed you various points in the investigation, who knows what and what their next lead is, and even the lead was false. It all ties together perfectly well. And the hints they drop are timed exactly the way you need them to be for this plot.
Yeah, I felt like in True Detective, I was continuously not giving a shit about the new, all the new information that was coming through. Like, there was the only thing I cared about, really, was the Crowe mask thing in the beginning. And I was like, that is cool. I want to see where that goes. And then it was garbage at the end.
It's interesting to think of how to properly place red herring, because LA Confidential does it organically. I every time they introduced a new segment of the plot, I understood where it came from, and I was never like
there was no left turns or anything.
Yeah, it never felt cheap.
Agreed.
Where what was it? Halfway through, even more than that, they introduced the diamond caper in True Detective, the Crowe mask. The character who did that, you find out of at the same time of the diamond. Like it's like they introduced the main plot towards the end of the season, and rushed to that. I don't know. I can't comprehend. I don't know what the point of it is.
That's what we said. Like all that stuff is fine on the surface, but the way they parceled it out was like the opposite of trying to make you care and get invested in the story.
It just seemed like they put that back seat kind of, and they were, and that, I don't know, it seemed like they put a lot of things backseat. Maybe they were just trying to do like a character piece and they really didn't give a shit about the plot, but that's not the way to do it,
but the characters are flat too. Like, all right, here, let me do the thing, right? The way they process it out, right? So they could have, remember that scene in one of the episodes in TD where Desiree has to go to like the counseling session because she's getting accused of sexual harassment. That went fucking nowhere. Instead of that, they could have given you another piece of information about the who discovered what.
Or they could have had that go somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
I kind of liked that scene at the time, but it was just worthless.
Yeah, it was completely moot. So again, that made you like, okay, you think you might get interested in it, but it went nowhere, and then now you've forgotten about the other, the actual investigation.
All right, so I guess we're going to give final thoughts here. I'm going to say that LA Confidential is a masterpiece that you should definitely see. True Detective lacks complete subtlety.
Crapster piece.
Yes, just like Steve-O lacks complete subtlety. So if you want the experience, watch LA Confidential and Carlito's Way, and you'll see a better combination of all the plot lines that happen in True Detective Season 2. Scott?
I absolutely agree with that. Do it, have a double feature for yourself, those two movies, and then you can say, when someone asks, hey, did you see New True Detective? Yeah, but it was good, actually.
Yep, LA Confidential, good. True Detective, bad.
And so I'm Jonathan E. Mazer with Scott Dilla.
Keep it off the record.
Stephen Ramosi.
On the QT.
And I'm Jonathan E. Mazer. And as always, hush hush.
This has been MOTS. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time. Music by Chris Morgan.
Editing and engineering by Scott Thurlow.
This has been a Los Angeles production. All rights reserved.